Hello, my name is Darryl, President of Vacuum Pressing Systems. In this video, we are going to look at one of the 4 steps that it takes to take a piece of raw veneer, not paper backed, wood on wood, just a piece of raw veneer. First step is to joint the edge so you can bring the pieces together. The second step is a way to hold those pieces of veneer together. The third step is gluing. What glue are we going to use? How much glue are we going to use? How are we going to spread the glue? And then the fourth step is how do we apply pressure? So those 4 things will take a piece of veneer from just its raw state into a panel ready for sanding and cutting to turn into your project. In this video, we are going to look at the first step, which is joining the veneer. How do you make the veneer have a very tight edge so no glue penetrates through that and there's no gaps when you go to glue it? And there are quite a few different ways to do it depending on how fragile the veneer is. Now, a lot of people think that, and when you often see a piece of raw veneer, the edge looks pretty straight, but it's not straight enough to go to the second step and try to tape it or seam it, however you're going to do that. At the mill where that veneer is made, they are not fussing with those edges. Now they may clip the edges in a bundle, but they're not fussing with how good that edge is. That's what you have to do. So let's start by taking a close-up look at some veneer, some edges that you might think would be perfectly fine, and edges that you were really clear would not work without you cutting that edge first. So let's take a look at this. So here are a couple veneers. This is some bird's eye maple, and if you look at that edge, it looks pretty straight, right? And this is just the way I got it. And if I took a couple pieces and put them together, you would almost, the camera's not going to pick this up here, but you can see right there, it touches here. Could I force? No, I need to cut that, right? So that's an example of a veneer that, and a lot of veneers, most of the common veneers, mahogany, walnut, cherry, oak, they're all going to look like this. Now this is an olive ash burl, and you can see that even here the edge has been cut, but not very well, and there's chips out of it, and I'm going to have to pick out what I want. So this is clearly, you couldn't get away with it, and this is more fragile, and how we're going to cut this veneer is going to be different than how we can cut this veneer. This veneer has more options. This veneer, you got to be careful that it's going to chip out and stuff like that. And one thing that, I said there were 4 steps. There's really 5 steps. And that is, there's some wrinkling here. Sometimes you need to flatten the veneer. So that's actually the first step. But I'm not really covering that, and I do that in other videos. I'm just talking about veneers that are ready to be jointed. So this is a couple examples. Now I'm going to set up and demonstrate tools to cut it with. So the next step is to actually cut some veneer. And I'm going to demonstrate this with this really simple tool that's been around forever, and it's very effective and it's very cheap. It's just called a veneer saw. And it comes in a couple different forms. There's one with a handle on the top. This one has the handle offset on the side. And they work really well. They're very effective. And they're very cheap. I think I bought this thing like 20 years ago for $12. It's probably, triple that now. But anyway, it works really well, and I'm going to demonstrate it. So again, we're going to go in for a close-up, and I'll show you how I do it. So I am set up, ready to cut this veneer. I decided just to use a couple pieces of this scrap curly maple I could have done something longer, but it just fit in the camera a little bit better. So this is what I'm using. And so I have the veneer, I have the straight edge, and then just a spoil board so I don't cut on my bench. And what's important about this straight edge is its thickness. The key here is you want the veneer saw to be at 90 degrees so that you get a nice square cut. And so some people might think, hey, why not just use a straight edge? The problem with this kind of a straight edge is that it's easy to tip, and then that will affect the cleanness of the cut. And even something thin like this, I think it's a little too thin. I think it's too easy to tip over a little bit. So that's not what I would use. I like it nice and thick, at least 1.5 inches. And oh, by the way, I did find the other veneer saw that I talked about before, and I'm not a real fan of it because it stands up high, but yes, you do put pressure in here. It's just not my style. There's nothing wrong with it. Some people might really like it. I like this. So in terms of cutting the veneer, I use 3 fingers. So I want it to stay square against the straight edge. So I use 2 fingers there, and then I press down with the thumb. Okay? So basically it's just pull strokes like this. All right? It's going to take a few cuts to cut through, and there, that's piece number 1. And my veneer saw is probably not the sharpest there is, and there's cut number 2. Okay, so that's basically how you use a veneer saw. One thing is you want to be able to come right out and through, so I make sure this clamp is off that way so I get a nice clean stroke. So that's the basics of cutting with a veneer saw. One last thing about a veneer saw. When you get a veneer saw, and if we look at it sort of like this, the blade is square. And what I mean by that, and I did this little illustration, the sketch on the left shows that in cross-section the blade is square. I put a bevel on it, which it shows on the right, and the arrow points to the side that goes up against the fence. Now, if you look at this and we catch it in the light just right, see that right there? You can see that there is beveled. I ground the teeth so that there's a bevel from the bottom of the teeth to the top of the teeth. On this side, it's just the way it is on the factory. So this little bit of bevel kind of helps the cutting action better. It's sort of, think of this as a knife with teeth. So when you go to cut, it cuts a little faster and a little cleaner. So that's just something to consider doing, is sharpening your veneer saw when you get it. So the next question is, when would I choose the veneer saw over some other method? And there's a few situations. One is if I'm just doing a few pieces, if I'm doing 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, even 12 pieces, I might grab the veneer saw. And if it's somewhat short, if the veneer is like 10, 12 feet long, going back and forth with the veneer saw can get a little tedious. So I'm not going to use it. I'm going to use something more mechanized for that. The other reason that I would reach for the veneer saw is if the veneer is really delicate, like a burl or even ebony can be very stringy and tear easy. A veneer saw will not chip or tear veneer. And the last thing is if I'm doing something like a 12-way match, like you see in this picture that I did a while ago, and all those veneers come to a point, and sometimes by hand just gives you more control, and I really want to have control when doing some fussy stuff like that. Otherwise, in general, I tend to go with something more mechanized. I'm doing 20, 30, 40, 50 sheets of veneer. I'm not going to pull the veneer saw out. So with that said, let's take a look at a more mechanized method and have a look at that. So with this method of cutting veneer, I'm using a track saw. So you have your circular saw, you have the track, the beam, so to speak. These are some mahogany veneers I have, and then you have the spoil board, of course. So you would just put this on top of the spoil board, and I'd, of course, line all my veneers up carefully on top of each other, which I'm not doing right now. And then you would just simply put this on the track and, you know, pull the trigger. I'm not actually going to do it, but I would run it down like that. And the downward pressure really holds it. You know, there's a thought that it might slip around, but it really doesn't. It works very nice. And I also have an 8-foot track, so I can do much longer work. And for basic straightforward veneer, this is a very practical method, and I would comfortably do 10, 20 pieces at once. So, you know, it works very well. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the track saw. Of all the methods, this is probably the easiest and the quickest. The only downside is there's no pinch. So there's no way that it's being squeezed. So you're really going to be sticking to straightforward veneers, you know, mahogany, oak, maple, cherry, just straightforward veneers. You're not going to do any burls or crotches and those fancy stuff. But with a good 80-tooth blade, you can cut a lot of veneer with this, and it works quite well. So with that said, I'd like to go on to the next method that really pinches the veneer and is somewhat mechanized. So what I have here is a shop-made version of a commercial veneer saw. I call it a beam saw because there's this beam on top and beam on bottom, and they help create the pinch for the veneer. And a commercial veneer saw is $50,000 easily, and I'm pretty confident that people watching this video are not in the market for that. So this is a way that you can make a commercial type veneer saw at home or at your shop. And the way it works is you would lift this up, slide the veneer in, clamp it on both ends, and then if it was a commercial veneer saw, it would come, that's why they call it a saw, it would come down with a saw blade and cut the veneer, and then with a router come back and trim it right up to the edge. So it's very clean. With this, I'm just going to use a router because it would be really complicated to do the saw on the router, and you really don't need to do the saw. The router works quite well. And this is a flush trim bit that rides on this bottom edge. And basically you just line it up and run it down like this. And it does a great job. What I really like about it, and it's to me a step up from the track saw I showed you previously, is that it can handle really delicate veneers like burls and crotches and all that kind of stuff that would chip out. With this, it's not going to do that because of the pinch. So I find it really handy, and it sure is a lot easier than the veneer saw and repeated strokes. And you can do a lot of pieces of veneer in here in one pass. So I'm going to demonstrate this actually, but before I do, I want to go over a few of the details about making it, in case you were going to consider that you want to make sure you do so it works real well. So I'm going to take a minute and go over the construction of it. What I want to show you here is 4 things that are important to have this jig work well. And the first thing is that this beam, so there's one on the bottom, one on the top. The one on the top is slightly bowed in this way. Not a lot, just a little bit. So when you clamp it on the ends, it's of course going to be tight on the end. It gives it a little extra pressure in the middle. And I only do it on the top. I don't do it on the bottom. So if you look, see when I press down on that, that shows that you got some bow there. And it's probably about a 1/16 on each end. This is a little under 4 foot. It could be more, but that's the way this is. The second thing is the placement of this beam. The closer it is to this edge, and this whole jig is about the pinch here, the greater the force on this edge. So if I take this router, one of the problems is a standard router, this distance is fairly, I'd have to push that back further. Where if we look at this distance is much smaller. So when choosing your router, try to get one with a base that is fairly small. Either get a trim router or they make a standard router with a straight edge. It's not round all the way, which gets you in closer. So choose your router, then make your jig. All right? So that's one thing. Move that out of the way there. Number 3 is this pin, right? You want to be able to always come back and drop it and have these line up. So that's fairly important. The last thing is this is a piece of solid that is glued onto this piece of MDF, same on the bottom, and it could be plywood. I just happen to have MDF. And when I glued this solid piece on, it was a little wide, and I flush trimmed this side, and then on this side, the side that goes against the veneer, I put a heavy piece of paper all the way down, and I flush trimmed it, and then pulled the piece of paper off, and I have a very small little lip here, which I also have. You can't see it, but there's a little lip on that as well. So when this gets clamped, there's a little extra pressure right on this edge here, which again, it's all about the pinch so that it doesn't chip out. So those are the 4 things that you want to pay attention to if you decide to make this jig. All right, so I've got the jig set up. I got it clamped on both ends. I have some veneer here. This is a madrone burl, so it would be fairly chippy. And I'm going to use this router with the flush trim bit that I showed before. But one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to what's called climb cut, which is run the router backwards. And the reason for that is as the bit is spinning, if I go the normal way, it's wanting to try to chip this out. Where when you climb cut, you kind of push into it and it doesn't do that. It's just an extra precaution to try to make sure that I don't have any chip out. And in fact, I'm going to go this way, and then I'm going to come back and go this way just to clean up any fuzz. So, and the key here is I keep my hands on the back edge so it Let's take a look at this. I don't think the camera is going to be able to see it, but it's completely clean, no chip out at all. So that's showing this jig. So the last method I'd like to demonstrate is using a veneer knife. And the first thing I want to say is what I consider is not a veneer knife. And a utility knife or the infamous box cutter are not tools acceptable in my book for cutting veneer. Now, there is a veneer knife, and there's a few different ones, but I'm going to demonstrate this one. It's a veneer knife, but it is designed for cutting veneer. And there's some different qualities as to why this is acceptable, but this is not. So I'd like to go in for a couple detail shots to explain the reasons why one is acceptable over another. So let's have a closer look. So as far as the utility knife or box cutter goes, there are 3 things as to why I don't tend to reach for this tool and don't find it acceptable. One is it's unsupported out at the tip, right? Really, its support is right there, and a box cutter is actually worse. And what this means is that this is pretty squirrely grain. The grain is going in different directions. Now, if you had a board, a straight edge against this, and you're trying to go this way, as the veneer heads in a different direction, especially away from the straight edge, the blade will wander. No matter how well you hold it, the blade will wander in that direction a little bit. And so you'll get a slightly wavy line. And in some cases, a straight sort of fibrous veneer like this mahogany is even worse. So let's say there's a straight edge against here and you're cutting this way. Well, you can see the grain is going in that way. So it wants to pull it away, and then you're going to be trying to hold it and pull it away. And when you match those two pieces, you're most likely going to get a little gap there. So that's the first thing, is that it's unsupported. The second thing, and it's not a huge thing, but it does make a difference, and that is there's a certain thickness to this. And one edge is not straight, so there's a V. So when you cut your veneer, you get a little V effect. And what that means is when you put together your two pieces of veneer, you're looking for that joint to be invisible, and you can't guarantee that. And then the third thing is, for this to work well, you want it at a really low angle, and you got to get your hand underneath it. So, you're cutting like this. So the veneer cutter, and I took this piece apart so I could take this off. I'll address those three things with the veneer cutter. And that is, yes, it's a blade, but it is super, super thin. I think this blade is the same for that used to be on old shaving razors. So the V effect is pretty negligible. Second is it's at a very low angle. And third, it's very well supported. So you can see right here that that's at a very low angle, and this is holding that tip right there. The only downside to being well supported at the tip is you only can fit a couple pieces of veneer at a time under this. So I don't use it all that often. But there is one other purpose for this that none of the other methods will do at all, that this will do. So I'm going to set up and demonstrate the other function for the veneer cutter. So what this veneer cutter is great at, that none of the other methods will do, is you can strip out little teeny 1/16 inch pieces of veneer or less, and it does a beautiful job. So what I have here, this is a piece of a black dyed veneer. It's nice to have a black inlay. And what I do, and I cut once to make sure this was very straight. And I want a 1/16 of an inch, and this is an 1/8 because this is a little offset. You can see that there. This plate is about a 1/16 of an inch thick. So what I do is I have this piece of 1/8 inch, and I bring that up to there and line it up on that end so it's flush. Okay, and I should, and I'm left-handed. That's the other thing, is you can put it on either side. So if you're left or right-handed, this thing is can go either way. So I'm going to live dangerously and not clamp this, and I'm just going to pull it down. And usually it will do it in one pass. So there you have a nice, sweet little 1/16 inch piece of inlay. And this tool works very well for that. And I am going to say I've kind of maligned the box cutter utility knife, but I use this all the time for cutting veneer, for rough cutting all the time. I'm always using one of these. I'm just not going to do the joinery with it. So that's it for that. Well, this about wraps up the techniques I use to cut veneer. There are others, like clamping veneer between two boards and running it over to the joiner. I have tried that, and that is not a technique I like. the clamps in the way of running over the joiner. I like to keep my veneer stationary and let the tool make the motion, not the other way around. Another method is a block plane. You can go along the edge of the veneer with a block plane, and I chuckle a little bit because I find that is not a particularly user-friendly method, but people do it, and that's fine as well. So I hope that methods I've shown you you find useful. I think they're very straightforward and reasonably easy to use. And so with that said, good luck joining Veneer, and you can go on our website, and we have other videos as well. I have one about taping joints together. So have a look at that, and happy veneering.